Hello, this is Dr. Stanley Lang, and welcome to this broadcast. The subject for today is on stress management, which is the learning how to deal with the effects of chronic stress. So, in the last couple uh, of broadcasts, I've talked about the definition of stress or chronic stress being the gap between our expectations and our reality. At least that's a working definition that I found to be most useful because I can visualize it pretty well, and I can see all the different places in my own life where there's where there's a big gap that does generally feel the most stressful. Now, for the purposes of these discussions, we're making the assumption that at this point we can't change that gap, so we're kind of stuck with the gap. If we are stuck with a big gap between what we want and what our reality is, how can we best deal with that? And I've been suggesting that approaching it with a whole person health approach, that is focusing on body, on mind, and on spiritual resources, is the most effective way. At least this is what I've seen in over 30 years of medical practice. There are a lot of different things that you can do physically, emotionally. A lot of times people forget the spiritual side, and today we're going to talk about the spiritual side of dealing with chronic stress. So one of the things I'm going to talk about is actually investing in relationship with God. Now, a lot of people talk about God, and to some extent, many of us believe in God, and many of us really feel like we have a relationship with God. But sometimes I think we take God for granted just like we take other people for granted. Now, the difference between focusing on a relationship and cruising in a relationship is the difference between really trying to make that relationship grow and just sort of going about the same thing day after day, uh, not really working at the relationship. So when we're kind of just expecting things to be the same, that's what I would call cruising versus building in the relationship. So uh, how do you build a relationship with God? Well, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail today on how you build a relationship with God, just that you can build relationship with God. That's going to be what I'm suggesting to you today. And each one of us can build more because each one of us takes God for granted to some extent. A lot of us take God for granted most of the time. So how does building relationship with God help with chronic stress? Well, there's a couple of different ways. First of all, building relationship with anybody takes our mind off of the gap. So when we're focused on another person, we're not thinking about that difference between the reality and our expectations. Same is true with relationship with God. If I'm focused on building my relationship with God, I'm not focused on that reality gap. And that alone helps a great deal. But even more importantly, just like in building relationships with people, when we build relationship with God, there is a force that flows into our lives that is really healing. It's a very powerful force that can sustain us through lots of very stressful circumstances. I remember a patient that I took care of more than 20 years ago who had a really bad condition, and she had seen all of the specialists that she could see. She pretty much resigned herself to her circumstances, which were very painful, and I would see her on a monthly basis to try to help fine-tune the treatments that we could do. And at the end of each visit, I did offer to pray with her, and she graciously accepted. And after a while, she would tell me that she really felt that the prayer helped more than the medicine. Now, there wasn't anything magical that I was doing. I was mainly facilitating what was already a big thing in her life. She was a very faithful woman, and faith was a big part of her life. But just me helping to step into that gap helped her to focus more on her relationship with God. And just for that moment, she would experience an increase in that life-giving energy that flows into us when we focus on building our relationship with God. So the difference between not being focused on building a relationship and building a relationship is the difference between a swamp and flowing water. Uh, when we're focused on the unhappiness we have with the reality expectation gap. In other words, we're focused on what we don't have. We're focused on the misery we do have and the good thing we don't have. When we're focused on that, we are in the swamp. But when we're focused on building relationship, especially with God, we're in flowing water. So there's a lot of different ways to build relationship with God, and I don't want to get into a lot of details on this broadcast, but I do want to say one thing. If we are primarily focused with just being with God, I'm just happy to be with God, like I would be happy to be with any other person that I love, it's much more powerful than if I'm approaching God with a give me, give me, give me kind of relationship. So I encourage you to not only build some time with, or create some time so that you can build relationship with God. It will have a powerful effect on decreasing the effects of chronic stress, not to mention the spiritual blessings that are going into your life. But focus on the pleasure of just being with God. Sit with God and see what happens. One of the things that will happen, I believe, is a deeper experience of God's love for you, and this will be healing. If this has been encouraging to you and helpful, I do ask you to share this with friends and family, and also to subscribe to this channel. Have a great day, and God bless.